At this time, I will call to order the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting for October 2nd, 2023. We have one item on the consent docket. Trustees?
Motion to approve consent docket.
Second.
Motion and a second. Please vote. Consent docket's approved with a vote of 5-0. Public comment on items not scheduled for public hearing. We do have one person signed up to provide public comment. That is Mr. Robert Sitton. There you are.
Thank you, councilors, for welcoming me, or that I'm glad that I can come and speak. I'm Robert Sitton, 5717 West Indiana Lane, out rurally of Stillwater, and I am your Rural Water Advisory Chairman. So I'm kind of here to speak a little bit of thanking you all for taking on the Yost Lake pump upgrade last week in the special sessions. I very much appreciate that. And then the next thing we kind of need to talk about is this water report that's coming to you tonight. And on that report, they have left out some of the clauses and agreements that was put in forth back in 2006, and it's been on every single water report forward from 2010. So me reading through this report, it's been left out. And that agreement is stated in the proposal of the consideration to receive us into Stillwater, and it reads, existing customers of the Corp will be guaranteed water service by the city, and we be charged the same rates for water as residents of the city. So that's one of the clauses that need to be put in that has been left out. And I can show you where the previous studies, that was back in 2010, and they had it in there on every single line. This report that you're receiving tonight, they did not do the research to include any of that. So just remember, whatever numbers that they're presenting to you are skewed, because they've got a different proposal than what's supposed to be in there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Sitton. All right. Well, that will take us to the main item on this agenda, which is item 5A, presentation and discussion of water, wastewater, rural water rate study results and recommendations. That is a lot of R's. Dana Maddox is here to present this item.
Good evening, Dana Maddox, Utility and Billing Services Director. So in October of 2022, the trustees approved staff to enter into a water and wastewater cost of service and rate design agreement with NewGen Strategies and Solutions. Our internal team has been working with Dave Yankee to complete the study. As you saw last week, the electric study, these studies are very complex and involve a tremendous amount of data that has to be compiled and analyzed. I would like to recognize the departments for their support, time commitment, and dedication to this project: IT, engineering, finance, water utilities, and utility and billing services. Dave is here this evening to share the results of the study, to answer any questions you may have, and to discuss a potential path forward.
Good evening. For the record, my name's Dave Yankee with NewGen Strategies and Solutions, and I serve as the president of the company. Before we jump into the presentation, just to address that concern by the prior gentleman, we're aware of the 1.5 multiplier. We'll talk about it at the end of the presentation and our recommendations, but we are aware of that. So, okay. So let's just jump into it. We've got a full agenda here as far as what I'd like to address. First of all, I just want to go through what the purpose of this cost service study is. I'm going to define a couple terms: revenue requirement. We'll talk about the capital improvement plan, cost of water, and then water and wastewater rates, and revenue recovery from the proposed rates. And then we'll talk about some bill comparisons and benchmarking. So first of all, let's just jump into the purpose of the analysis. So first of all, the reason NewGen was retained, we were asked to develop a 10-year forecast of your operating and capital costs. So you'll see a lot here about the forecast, the capital improvement plan, and some options for funding those at various levels. One of the key items was to develop retail and wholesale and raw water rates that ensure the financial integrity of the utility. So again, I'll be talking about capital project scenarios, and then to do that, you have to have rates that can fund those projects. And again, one of the key items we're asked to address was the cost of rural and wholesale cost of service. So let's talk about the methodology. The first thing we had to do was develop a revenue requirement, and I'll define that on the next slide. After you determine what the cost of service is for the 10-year period, we always have to then look and say, are you over or under recovering with your current rates? And if you're under recovering, then what type of rate recommendations will put you in a good position where you can fund all those capital projects. So revenue requirement, it's a very simple term. It's basically covering all of your operating and maintenance costs, rolling stock with regard to the equipment like vac trucks and things like that for sewer operations, and then your capital improvements. And so here we're talking about all the needed improvements at the water and wastewater treatment facilities, the lines, et cetera. And we'll talk more about those. So those capital improvement projects, they can be funded through what we call pay-as-you-go cash that's generated through rates that then you can pay cash for the projects. You don't have to issue debt or a combination of both. And that's what we're proposing here, pay-as-you-go and the issuance of debt. So let's talk about the capital improvement plan. There is a large capital improvement plan. I'll call it your CIP. If you look up at the slide, again, there are a lot of numbers, but if you look in the bottom right corner, it's about $596 million in total, and about 85% of it is water related, and about 15% is wastewater related. Okay, so you can see there's a significant amount of capital projects proposed for every year.
Can I ask you one quick question?
You
there?
bet.
Are these current dollars or are they future dollars? You take into account?
Yeah, very
Inflation
good
these?
question. So these dollars have been inflated at 4% per year. So great question. The total projects were estimated in dollars back actually a couple years back at about $425 million. They're then inflated 4% per year to the year it would have, the project's budgeted for. So if you were to do all those projects, it would be $596 million at the time those dollars are spent. I know you've had some of these larger projects mentioned to you. So one of them is the finished water pump station, the chemicals package at the water treatment plant, backup supply system, and then the raw water line improvement. All those are just four of the big ones at $176 million, and then there are additional projects as well. So, check one of my items here. So what we've started with is the test year for the water revenue requirement. And so we're starting with the 2024 budget, which is the budget that was approved to start July 1. That's about $10.1 million. Then there are some adjustments. One of the things you do is, again, fund on a pay-as-you-go basis for the water utility $5 million a year towards projects, again, so you can have a mixture of debt financed and pay-as-you-go so you can minimize your interest expense to the greatest extent possible. That grows the net revenue requirement to about $15.5 million. The wastewater, it's a similar approach. We took your 2024 budget, it's about $4.1 million. If you look at the bottom line there, again, you adjust pay-as-you-go about $2.5 million. that you pay in cash for capital projects. You're at about $6.7 million. Okay, from my perspective, there are going to be a lot of numbers today. This is probably, in my opinion, the most important slide to look at. So this lays out the two scenarios that we are going to propose to you. The first scenario, again, shows that full, and I want to emphasize this, the total capital funding under scenario 1 would construct $596 million of capital projects for your water and wastewater systems. And you can see that number up there on the fifth line in bold, total capital funding. Scenario 2 would fund $525 million of capital projects, okay? If you look up at above those lines, lays out the different funding mechanisms. So again, one of the key things over a 10-year period, cash funding, again, this is cash generated through rates, about $118 million of cash, and then the remainder of it, less the grants I'll talk about in a second, the rest, the $458 million, would be debt funded. So debt funding, $458 million, $118 million in cash can fund the project. Scenario 2, $373 million of debt, cash funding, and we did a little more cash, and you'll see when we get into showing you some of the options why we did that, but we increased the pay-as-you-go, and it's $132 million. One thing that's really good for you folks is the city did work to get earmarks, federal earmarks, and you've got $10 million in grant funds that are going to go towards these projects, plus your ARPA funding. So almost $19 million in grant monies that are available to offset what you've got to fund through cash, pay-as-you-go, and debt service. Real quick, and these are just some numbers for you to keep in your head then. If you were to fund the full $596 million of capital projects over 10 years for water and sewer, on average for your average water customer, and we'll go through the average bill, it would be an increase on the water side of about 14.2%. On the sewer side, it's about 6%. For the average customer, that's an average bill increase of about 12 to 13%. So 12% per year for the 10-year period. Scenario 2, it would be a 12.7% increase on the average water bill. Again, sewer is the same under both scenarios. Okay.
So just real quick, there's probably some interest calculation in there somewhere, but scenario 2 is showing a smaller average annual increase, but more cash funding.
Correct.
How's that?
Well, and I'm glad you're asking questions so we can emphasize these. Bottom line, the reason there's not as big an increase for scenario 2 is your capital funding. If you look at the fifth line, your $525 million in capital versus $596 million under scenario 1. So scenario 2, lower rates, $70 million less in capital. Again, you go from $596 million to $525. So the cash funding options, cash or debt, doesn't matter as much as the total amount of projects you're doing. So about 15% less projects, and you're able to get the rate down to 12.7.
Thank you.
Okay. So another thing, just some anecdotal comments I'm going to mention here. You've probably heard over the last few years, being on council, inflation and the horror stories with capital projects and what they've gone up. You know, that hasn't helped here. That's one of the reasons these numbers have gone up, is it costs more to do stuff like this. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. We just finished a wastewater cost service study for the city of Newcastle, Oklahoma. I was there the first part of September, and just an example that they're dealing with. As that city is growing, they have to improve their wastewater technology. In other words, you can't have some of the open basins for aeration and stuff. So they started looking 4 or 5 years ago, and it was going to be about a $20 million wastewater treatment plant because they're planning for growth. Then they started looking at, with inflation and everything, and they said about a year ago when we were working on the study, well, it's probably going to be about 40 million. Okay, so it's doubled. So you think that's as bad as it can get. So then they opened the bids, which was about a month ago, and it was $52.5 million. So, and to give you an idea, put it in perspective, that's $50 million for them. They have 4,000 water customers, about 2,000 sewer customers. A lot of them, because of their bigger lots, are septic. So sense of magnitude, there's an example there. And just, anecdotally, you use a lot of steel in these things. I was dealing with this when I put on my other hat, and I've been before you on solid waste issues. Over the last 4 years, we watched steel go from 20 cents a pound to when Russia invaded Ukraine, it went up to 80 cents a pound. Now it's back down to around 40, 45 cents a pound. So it's down, but it's still up 100% from where it was. So I guess that's good. But bottom line, your costs have all gone up. So, so let's talk about cost of water also. This was one of the things we're asked to look at. So one of the things we did, your retail costs, and again, your retail costs are your residential and commercial customers, okay? Their average cost in FY 2024 is estimated at $8.50 per 1,000 gallons. For the rural systems, they're $9 to $11 per 1,000. And then on the wholesale side, there's a wider range, $7 to $12 per 1,000. One of the reasons for that wider range on the wholesale customers, you have a couple wholesale customers that take off right by the water treatment plant. So they don't use your transmission and distribution system. So there's a cost they don't incur. So those customers are towards the lower end. Again, their rates are still well below where they need to be for cost recovery, but that's why there's a range there. And then on the raw water, about $3 to $4. As you go towards FY 2028, again, there are a lot of capital projects that are budgeted. I showed you that sheet with the $600 million. So looking out at FY 2028, it's projected that the retail cost would be $18 per 1,000 gallons. The rural system would be approximately $22 per 1,000. Wholesale, $9 to $20, and then the raw, $4 to $5. Something I want to mention here, when we started this study, when you do these types of studies, especially a 10-year forecast, you focus on the cost going forward. You say, okay, what are we going to spend from a capital standpoint? Who are we spending it on? And then you incorporate that into forecasting your rates. You usually don't look back to say, okay, what has been spent on a typical customer class. So when we started this and I was asked, do you want historical data? I had said, no, we're going to focus on going forward. I'm looking at these and again doing more research. I have asked the city to give me some data with regard to costs incurred historically with regard to the rural system. Again, those are not included here, but those would only, make the cost go up more. Those are costs incurred by the city. So we just want to look at it and be thorough. Okay. So here are your current water rates. Let me catch up here. So here are your current water rates, your minimum bills, the retail blocks on the side. So for instance, you have an inclining block rate. So you go up there on the top right. You have your wholesale customers' rates that are all about $3 to $3.60 per 1,000 gallons. And then you have your raw water customers around 84 cents. So we've got two scenarios, and there are a lot of numbers here. I'm going to focus on a couple numbers. Again, this is scenario one. It's up in the top right corner where you can't read it. It says 596 million of capital projects in scenario one. This is the one, again, where the average water rate increase would be 14.2%. Okay. So you can see if you look at the 3/4 inch meter up there on the top left, it's $7.45. That's what the average minimum bill is for most residential households. That's probably what you have. You might have a 1 inch, but most will have 3/4. If you look at what that minimum charge is and where it goes over the next 10 years, just go across to the far right and you see that $28.14. Okay, so that's what it would go to. Couple things I want to mention on that. But one key thing I want to mention is this is a 10-year forecast. What we would recommend is in 5 years, reevaluate, see where you are. 5 years ago, we weren't planning on inflation, and it happened. So what's going to happen next? So we would recommend you do a 5-year true-up, regardless if you do it in-house, you hire someone else, what have you, but you should do that. Now, let's talk about the minimum bill going from $7.45 to $28.14. No one's going to like that. But let me give you another couple examples here of what folks are dealing with. City of Newcastle, their current water minimum charge is $34 per month right now. Okay, that was before any rate increases. So they're already, they're beating you. They're at $34. So there. So that's one example. Tishomingo, we just finished their water and wastewater cost service study. They're at $49 for the minimum charge, plus a $5 debt surcharge. We didn't recommend that, but it was already in there. So they're basically paying $54 a month before they use any water. So just a couple examples. And then for me personally, I was at a water system down in Austin that's been a long time client of ours, and we were at a water board meeting last Tuesday and I was presenting. They voted a 33% increase in their water rates. Their minimum bill is going from $25.15 to $35.15 per month. Again, we're seeing this all over the place because of aging infrastructure, having to get systems upgraded, water supplies, et cetera, et cetera.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I understand what I'm seeing here. And that, so basically, this particular scenario illustrates quadrupling the base rate over 10 years. And included in those numbers are the capital to do all of our water projects. It's going to be to expand and improve the water treatment plant, do the Lake McMurtry Reserve project, probably some freshening up of the Caw pipeline. It's everything in there. If Shelley Crines does a great job and goes out and finds $50 or $100 million in grants, we would come back and we would revise these rates down to compensate for the fact that we've raised this capital that wasn't anticipated when we talked about these rates.
Correct. Now, there's the volumetric rate coming also. So this is the monthly, you are correct. These rates, these minimum charges, and then the volumetric rates for scenario one, which I'm going to show next, would generate the $596 million in capital. And you're exactly right. That's why when you put something like this in place, you constantly monitor it and you have it. So you're right. If you find additional grant funding, I remember not that long ago when projects came in under bid, then that would lower the cost of the project. So you're correct. And that's why, the city would constantly monitor this.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
So
Yep.
again, just to clarify, this base rate is what a customer will pay if they have 1 gallon of usage in a month.
This is the minimum charge that you pay every month, whether you use water or not.
Okay.
because this allows you to have access to water. And that's one of the things we always talk about, especially as you start issuing debt. Your financial advisors, when you issue debt, they're going to want to see your fixed charges, the minimum bill, fixed charge go up. They don't want everything or a larger percentage coming on your volumetric, because that's subject to weather, wet years, dry years. And so we struck a balance with the minimum charge going up and then the volumetric rate going up also.
Yeah, this is for the privilege of being connected.
It exactly is. At the end of the day, the water system, it has to be paid for you to use. Whether you use 2,000 gallons or 20,000 gallons, the system has to be ready. And in fact, when a new home is built, the city is required to have certain sufficient storage with regard to water capacity. And so they have to be ready to plan for the future.
Yeah. I own a property in Branson, Missouri, and whether I am there and use water or not, I pay $72.55 a month just to have the house sitting there.
Because they still, we've got clients that, and I heard someone talking here, but, elevated storage tanks where if they had old ones that had lead paint, you've got to get those resurfaced. I mean, it's, over $1 million to do that. There's all the you think taking, I'm a homeowner too. I hate the house bills I get for fixing stuff. Mm-hmm. It pales compared to water systems. So, no, those are good questions there. So moving along, this is the other portion. So scenario one, again, the $596 million capital project. So if you look up there, your volumetric rate would go from 745 up in fiscal year, and this is very important, it's in my notes. We are recommending a 3% increase January 1, 2024 for everyone. Retail, your wholesale customers, rural, everyone. And then after that, the increases are up in that, you're going to be averaging that 14%. Okay. So that you can see what those rates are. Again, a couple things I want to mention on here. Well, actually, I'll mention them on the next one when I go to wholesale. But that's your residential inclining blocks.
So,
yes.
Just to make sure I'm clear on that as well. So we would be looking at, so for instance, I actually have a copy of my bill. So right now I pay $15.08 for the flat rate. So that would go to, over the next 10 years, that would go up to $56.98.
Okay, you have a 1-inch meter.
I guess so.
Okay.
I see $15.08 on my bill.
Yeah, so okay.
Who knew? I had no idea.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, I would be paying up to $28.14 per 1,000 gallons?
Yep.
Okay.
And the blocks are up there. So okay. Let's just take fiscal year 2025. Mm-hmm. So if you're there, you're going to pay your minimum charge on your 1-inch would be $18.25, and then you would be paying $9.01 per 1,000 gallons. For the first 15,000 gallons. Okay. If you look up on that PowerPoint, you see that. That's 0 to 15. Then your next block, the 15,001 to 33,000 gallons, would go to the 945, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of information here, so please feel free to interrupt it. I wouldn't be able to remember all my questions. So let's go, that's the volumetric. Now, let me go back. Here we go. All right, so very important, these are the wholesale customers, raw water customers. And I want to emphasize, we have two water scenarios. The first one's the 596 million, second one's the 526 million. Sewer is the same for everything. okay? Because they only had $105 million in projects. It wasn't that bad. We're able to do it all with a 6% annual increase. And then these rates are the same under scenario 1 or 2 for your wholesale customers or your raw water customers. So one of the key things here, if you look up here, Lone Chimney and Noble County, if you look at current, they're at 363 and 361. So those are two of your highest wholesale customer rates, but they take water from right by the water treatment plant, okay? So bottom line, the cost to serve them versus Payne County and 51 East, who go through your transmission and distribution system, so they're using your system, they use the electricity that's pushing the water, they should actually be paying more, not less. So that's one of the recommendations we have up there, is moving those rates up so you can see by FY 2025, Payne County and 51 East are each at 457. Lone Chimney and Noble County are at the $4.30. Okay. Again, couple other anecdotal comments. Bottom line, serving the wholesale customers, their rates need to go up. They are well below the cost of providing the service. Example, again, I was at that water system last Tuesday. Their wholesale rates, just to give you an idea, in 2021, they were at $3.50 per thousand. At the beginning of 2025, they will be at $5.25. So they're going up. That customer, those wholesale customer rates are going up 50% in about 3 years. Okay, and let me tell you, that's not the end of their rates going up, because they need to get more water supplies, which are very expensive. So just giving you some examples.
And the raw water customers on that page are literally getting untreated water and treating their
Correct.
own water.
Yeah, but they're going to have to share in the costs associated with the CAW
Right.
line and pumping costs and repairs on the CAW line, which there's repairs on the CAW raw water line, and it's one of the reasons you need some improvements there, or redundancy. Again, I'm not an engineer, I'm a finance person.
So these are the rates, the changes for each of these customers is individualized to the situation under which they're getting water,
Correct.
right? And for the raw water customers, is that percentage lower because they're pulling it earlier in the process?
So their rates will be less, but they're going, because they're under recovering, we have them all for the residential. In scenario 1, we've got the residential customer bills after, the 3% increase. They're going up about, on the water side, about 17%, and then it goes to 15% in the 10 years. On the wholesale, especially for Payne and 51 East, because we had to get them up, the first increase is 30% in 2025, and then it goes to 20%. Lone Chimney and Noble County are about 5 percentage points less than them, because we've got to get Payne County and 51 East, whose cost to serve is more, up above. So they're going at a faster rate. And then the raw water goes up at those same percentages.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Scenario 2, again, in this scenario, you're only doing $525 million of capital projects.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
going to step back for a second, because we're talking about, these rates are designed, as Councilor Clark said, to allow us to do $500 million in system upgrades, which need to be done. We have a wide variety of different types of customers, as this shows, right? We've got our residential customers in town, we've got rural customers, we've got the wholesale customers. Is the cost sharing of all of these improvements prorated in some way? Are we saying basically every customer at the retail level is basically sharing the same burden of cost for these big? Because other than the raw water customers, everybody is needs the same amount of upgrade to the system, correct? I mean, that's.
Correct. How we look at that, and it's a really good, I'll keep it high level because I could talk about it a lot longer than you want to listen to it. But one of the things we did at length with, and it was really good, Stillwater has, on the engineering side, very detailed listing of those $425 million of projects. It's like 60 or 70 of them, what have you. And then it grows to 596 with the inflation. So we look at what those are related to. It's related to the raw water line. Okay, well, that hits everybody. Then if you have certain things that are associated with the water treatment plant, well, that doesn't hit the raw water customers. But then we start looking at how the remaining customers use the system. So that's where Lone Chimney and Noble County, they take off right by the water treatment plant. So they shouldn't share in distribution and transmission costs. And so you peel those out. So there's general, but then you try to break out where you can. And then one of the key things you do look at is peaking factors. And this is something that is laid out by the American Water Works Association, where you look at average monthly load to the peak month that a customer class puts on. Because the higher the peaking factor, the more burden they put on the treatment plant or storage. And some of the wholesale customers have some higher peaking factors, so that gets factored into theirs as well.
Okay. So suffice it to say, you didn't just come in and go 12%, 14%. I mean, these numbers are based on an incredible amount of math, based on actual costs, based on all of that. And then what we're seeing here is the result of a whole lot of background math.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, one more thing I want to clarify or get an answer to. We're back on the base rate structures. Does that include the first 1,000 gallons of usage, or is it $7.45, and if I use a gallon, it's another $7.45?
You have no consumption in there.
Okay, none at all.
Yeah, if you look up there, that thing is like an eye test. So if you look at the 3/4 inch block, if you have a 3/4 inch meter, tier 1, 0 to 5,000 gallons. So you're paying that $7.45 just for the right to be hooked up.
Yeah, well, this is the volumetric, but
Oh, yeah.
going back to the base rate structure.
Let me go back to, let me just get here. So
Right
base
there.
rate, I'm going the wrong way, hold on.
No, you were there. That's it. That was it. Go back.
It was scenario 2, but
Yeah, that was scenario 2. I'm going to go
Okay.
back to scenario 1.
We can use current on any of them.
Yeah,
So that
so-
$7.45 for a 3/4 inch meter
Yes.
is zero consumption.
Zero
If
consumption.
I use 1 gallon, it's another $7.45.
Well, it'll be per 1,000, and then depending, I'm not going to get into their billing, they probably do it in 100
Probably
gallons.
prorate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's, and so if you go up to 19,100 on the meter, and then it's 30,500, they roll it. But yeah, you know,
Okay.
I don't want to say what Dana's job is or how she does it. So, but did that answer your question?
Right.
Counselor Clark.
That answer
sorry,
your
what?
question? Did that answer your
You
question?
did answer my question,
Okay,
yes.
great.
Thank you.
No, you bet. All right, so let's go to scenario 2. Again, here we're going up. This is only $525 million of capital projects. On the water side, you're going up a little over 12% a year.
Dave, so scenario 2 included a smaller amount of capital improvement projects.
Correct.
I don't know if maybe you are going to explain, but can you explain, we went from 596 to 525, what is not included?
So I will turn that over to the city.
Okay. I just think as we start talking about that scenario, it'd be good to know
Yeah.
what we're not.
Do you want her to come up afterwards and talk about it, or now?
Up to you.
I think as we go through the numbers, I would like to understand what's not included.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's kind of amazing that some of these questions are predicted by some of our team members. Brad? So I summarized, I'm going to show you a couple things. First, I want you to know that our CIP that we have is a need-based CIP, capital improvement plan. It has everything on it that we know about, and it goes out for 25 years. And what we provided to New Gen when they asked was a 10-year look, and for all the things that we hadn't completed in the past 5 to 6 years because we didn't have money, you'll see it lined up in the first year. So really, this is just a long list. This is water and wastewater. I'm just going to scroll through it right now from the top.
We can't see it at all, so I
Right.
just, all I'm getting is
Yep,
an
you don't have to.
impressive, there's a lot,
Yes.
so.
And you don't even have to know what it says, but I'm just going to scroll so you'll see this is, everything is showing. All the water and wastewater projects are showing in their groups, or it's ordered by time. And so this is everything we have on the list for 10 years. And this is pump replacements and lift station refurbishments and heat exchangers and all kinds of things. When we have a water plant that has equipment and pumping and lift stations and booster pump stations, they all take refurbishment and care. Vehicles and tractors are on here. Tank and towers, the refurbishment that we do for ground storage tanks. So I get out in here to the very bottom, and it's just, that's the 10 years. I could show the rest of this over there. So when you ask the question about what we wouldn't do, I would, because this list is prioritized from what we most need to what we need later, then I would just take this and look up when I hit probably out of that 75 million that we're losing, maybe 55 is water. So I would, take off sewer here. This is just kind of what I would do. And go till I get to 55 million. I did that wrong. Sort of kind of in this way, where I'm just taking the bottom priorities and not getting to do those and pushing them off until later. And essentially what it means is you're taking on some kind of a risk. When we can't do that in the 10 years, when it's a pump we couldn't replace or a vehicle we couldn't buy or all the different things it is, then we don't, it's just more risk. It's the same way with our call line that we've lived with for many years and we haven't been able to invest anything in it. And now our risk is huge because of the problems that we have with the leaks and things. This is a way that I summarized that 596 million, and there on the left side it's cumulative, so there's about 485 in water and about 100 in wastewater. And so we would go through this is kind of by categories, and we would take the highest priorities, and we do 525 million of the highest priorities, and the rest would just get moved till later.
So then, Dave, is it that in the model, as you're looking at providing us options, that I don't want to say it was arbitrary because I'm sure that it wasn't, but certainly you were kind of just looking at the model, trying to figure out where you could affect a lesser increase in the rate structure?
So what we did there was look at the projects. If you were going to, first off, it's a huge CIP. And so we like to present a couple different scenarios to you to look at. And so there's a lot of this that is a priority. So, I mean, it's like you can't cut it in half and do that. So we gave you a scenario where basically we knocked about 15% off, And so, as Candy mentioned, it's those latter projects then. Okay, we had those planned later, years 9, 10. We'll push them. Okay. So it really was, I mean, if you ask me, you've got to look at, from my perspective, scenario one. But if you're like, okay, we'll go with scenario two, we'll leave some stuff off, you're still addressing a lot of the stuff on the front end. And so you're not kicking the can down the road, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
And I will just mention, we did put in the back of the packet behind my final discussion slide, there is a third scenario. It's listed as alternative A. and it's only like 5% increases, and if you look at that one, it's about 240 million of total capital versus the 596 or the 526 million. The 232, we did it to show you what 5 or 6% is, and it doesn't address the issue.
No, I mean, I think this is all a really important part of the conversation, you know, as we look at what it costs us to provide this service and what it costs us to maintain this critical infrastructure, and the kind of pain points that we're feeling right now, not having had the opportunity to do that. So I think it's all really important part of the conversation.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to keep. That's not my presentation. Oh, thank you.
Do you remember what slide you were on?
Let's go with 20. Okay, thank you. So let me get. So scenario 2, we talked about, again, it's about 20% less of the projects. Let's get to the wastewater. And so on the wastewater side, there is some good news. You have about $100 million of projects that need to be done, but with 6% annual increases over 10 years, that's doable. And honestly, because you cannot have any subsidy between the two utilities.
So you said that's doable without debt,
No, you'll need debt.
doable with debt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be pay-as-you-go and debt service, because you have about $105 million worth of projects. But, 5-6% when inflation a year ago was 9%, to me is that's a good story. Okay, so these are your current wastewater rates. Again, your wastewater, there's only one scenario, because we didn't have to do the different what-ifs of, hey, only doing 80% of it like the water. So here, your current minimum charge is $8.80. That would grow to $14.89. So most folks, that's what your minimum charge will be for being connected to the system. Again, a good example right now, Newcastle, their current minimum charge is $16. It will be going to $28 by 2028 with the new plant. So looks like they beat you again. So yeah, so on the volumetric side, honestly, you're at $3.57 going to $6. We have clients in Texas where the wholesale treatment of service, like North Texas Municipal Water District's a huge regional wastewater provider. Cities connect and all their wastewater goes to them for treatment. The wholesale rate is $9 a thousand. That doesn't take any of the cost of running the collection system within the city. And yours only goes to $6. Again, an example, Newcastle's rate was $1.50 right now, which is incredibly low, but that was due to the type of technology. It's just aeration. They're going to be at $6.50 by 2028 on a per thousand basis. So again, so let's talk, and again, a lot of numbers, I apologize. The key thing I just want to focus on is, and again, this is scenario 1, $596 million of capital projects. If you can read it, the third line over under, as you go across, you get to where you have the over recoveries that are about $3 to $4 million in 2032 and 2033. If you're asking why do you have that much over recovery, one of the reasons, this is the scenario, and we'll talk about it, that has more debt for the water system. You have to maintain a 1.25 times coverage requirement. I won't get into all of it, except means you have to keep some extra cash, because otherwise your financial advisors will be very nervous about you having all this debt and not a little margin for, again, wet weather, you don't sell as much water, you want to have some margin. The sewer is real good on the second from bottom, on all the way over on the second from bottom line, over recovery of 234 grand. And then on scenario 2, if you look again on that third line, there's only the over recovery of $1,263,000, and that is because we did more pay as you go instead of debt service. So by doing more pay as you go and increasing the cash, we didn't have to issue as much debt in that scenario. Okay. Let me catch up.
I appreciate the fact that these are all long-term projects. We've got to be looking at 10-year, at least, windows here. But I mean, it's hard to believe there's a whole lot of accuracy looking at these numbers 10 years out. I mean, costs, something breaks we didn't plan to break. It's a good exercise to say this is why we would put rates where we're putting them. But I don't know. I mean, what's the margin of error on these kinds of numbers for a project like this?
So from my standpoint, and again, everyone's system, and I'll let Candy chime in if she likes, what we have seen on these, when we do these, you've got a very detailed capital plan, and you're guaranteed something's going to happen over 10 years you didn't budget for, because that's just how it is. Oil goes up or steel prices go down, what have you. From my perspective, what I always do, the way I look at it, there are key projects like those 4 we talked about. I showed they were like 176 million. Those have to happen. They're already moving. So boom, that's like a third of your capital. So that's going to happen. And then I bet probably another 40-50% of those things are going to happen. So that's 80-85%. But something happens. A lift station failure, and all of a sudden you're spending $1.5 million, and you're like, well, I didn't plan on that. But you're moving the rates in the right direction, and that's the key thing. You've got to move the rate increases so you're funding these projects or the other things that come up that you didn't plan on because your crystal ball didn't go that far out.
And you said something that jogged my mind, but these numbers include projected growth overall in the system. New meters and
yeah, we do, and we have conservative growth, because what you don't want to do is say we're going to grow at 5% a year, and then it doesn't happen, and then you're under recovering. Okay. If something grows quicker, then again, that's why you're always going back and visiting it, and that's why you do the 5-year checkup. Let's say something happens, you have a 500 home development that comes in the next 7 years because there's some major, we've seen that happen. We had a client in New Mexico that got I don't know how the citizens would feel. They got a horse track for gambling, and they got a prison. So it created a lot of new homes. Not sure it was the client base they wanted, but, so those things can change things. But that's why you look at a 5-year checkup. Because if, let's say, something happens, you can always go, you know what? When we had it tailing at 15% increases, 12.5%, hey, now we only have to do 5%, let's say. That's why you do the checkup halfway through.
Thank you.
No, those are good questions to ask. All right, I'm going to hit just because this has gone a little longer, I'm going to hit just I've done a couple examples of the average bill for a water customer at 6,400 gallons of water and 4,500 gallons of sewer. That kind of represents your average customer. There's another example with 10,000 gallons, and I'm just going to skip through it. It's the same trend. But on this, what you can see, and this is where most of your residential customers would be, except for Councilor Hawkins, who has a 1-inch meter. So, okay, all right, well, thank you. So your average bill would be $80.50 right now. With the 3% increase, it goes to $82.90. And then you can see the bills for the next 4 years go up on average about 14% a year. And you can see less of the increases on the wastewater side. Again, I'm going to skip through the 10,000. On the scenario 2, again, just look at the bottom line. Instead of being around 14% for the annual increase, you're running around 12.5%. So again, about a 1.5% difference there. Okay, and then 10,000. Okay, benchmarking. So let's take a little time and look at the benchmarking. Let me get there. So again, we'll focus on the 6,400 gallons, 4,500 gallon scenario. So the first 3 columns, the first one is your current bill. So again, the first one, total monthly bill, $80.50. Under scenario 1, January 1st, it would go to $82.90. In scenario 2, it still stays at $82.90 because everybody was going to go up 3%. But then here are the ones you benchmark against, and you can see you're pretty comparable, even with that first increase. Granted, it's only 3%, but you're pretty comparable with Bartlesville, Broken Arrow, Edmonds above you, and you can see where the other folks come in. Something I want to mention here, comparing water systems and what folks are doing, it's always hard to compare apples to apples. If someone's on groundwater versus surface, if you're on groundwater, groundwater's cheaper to treat than surface water. Do you have a large industrial base that is subsidizing, or is it primarily your residential, commercial, wholesale, which a lot of cities, that's how they are. But this is a proactive approach. I can guarantee you these other cities up here, their rates will be going up over the next 10 years. They will have capital projects either for repairs, adding capacity, or trying to get additional water. That's one good thing. I was checking on, talking with Bill about it. You have a huge abundance of raw water, which is really good. Again, I've got a client that they're having to, in Central Texas, they are having to buy additional water for growth. And we did a study for them over a 30-year cycle. They have 2 options, and this is in dollars, not net present value, but over the 30-year period, the 2 scenarios are they would spend $300 to $400 million for additional water. So you're very fortunate you've got a raw water supply, but now you've got to maintain the system. My last slide. Hey, that's me. In closing, so what I would recommend, next steps, okay. So next steps, we would recommend January 1st implementing the 3% increase on your retail, wholesale, and raw water, and that's what we've shown. We would then recommend implementing the annual rate increases at July 1 for whichever of those 2 scenarios you went with, okay? We would recommend implementing the 1.5 times multiplier. I want to be clear, we have not incorporated that into these rates, so that is not in here. My understanding, there's a legal document. It's a policy issue, so all I'm doing is giving you my recommendation of what we see in the industry. There's a significant amount of money that's going to be expended on them to the benefit of the rural system. It makes sense to consider that. There's a higher peaking factor on some of them that makes sense to consider it. It's pretty typical in the industry that there's a multiplier that oftentimes is put on rural systems or outside city customers. You do that on the sewer system. You already do 1.5 times, so you have a precedent for it. But again, that's my 2 cents there. Let's see, what else? I think that's everything I wanted to focus on, and I appreciate the questions along the way. Any other additional questions or comments?
Okay, so I do. As far as timing, we're looking at $600 million that we've got to spend over 10 years. What kind of timing would you recommend? I mean, do we do $150 million worth of bonds right now? I mean, how do you time all this to make it work?
So, Candy already, they have a plan laid out. And so I would use that plan. And I think you've got project managers. You know, this is a question for you.
I do like Gantt charts. So we wouldn't do bonds. I think we would take out loans, and we would heavily rely on the SRF program. And we've talked about WIFI in the past, and we've never been convinced because they have a higher application and a matching, a 50% matching that's required, but they have the ability to loan us that kind of money to hit all these years of expenses. For SRFs, I used to be with SRF. I was there for a year and a half, and I recall the point in time when Broken Arrow had a huge water plant to build, and they funded only their plant that year, and no one else was able to receive funding. And so I know they've done that at least at one point to give us some pretty big numbers.
Okay, enlighten me on SRF. That's an acronym I
Sorry,
don't
State
know.
Revolving Fund. So there's
Thank
our state revolving fund. They fund on both the clean water and the drinking water side, and it's money that comes down from the feds, and then it takes care of itself as the interest comes back. Then it kind of revolves, I guess. Does that help? It is a monumental task for sure. And when we look at that money and think about the staff we've had in the past and how much work we've been able to do, we've kind of nickel and dimed ourselves because we know that's the money we have and we don't have any more money to spend. And so to think about us changing the way we plan and program that kind of work, it would be much larger projects, big programs where on the one document where I was pointing out, like, for example, this 300,000 linear feet of water line, which is what's on the 10-year forecast, that's 56 miles. So we'd hire groups to spread that out over 10 years, and we'd work with Christy on the loan programs, and it'd be a pretty big planning effort, but we can do amazing things.
And Christy's queued up.
I just wanted to point out that under the SUA trust indenture, we do have a debt limit without going to a vote of our citizens of 40% of prior year's revenues. And so that was taken into account and considered during this rate study. And then, as Dave already mentioned, we do have to adhere to our debt service coverage ratio of 1.25 times. And that is, it's not only in our internal debt policy, but that is more importantly in our bond indenture for our the bonds, the revenue bonds that funded the Energy Center.
So what is that 40% number? What does that come up to about?
It's roughly about $40 million.
So we're still $100 million short on the main stuff then?
Yes.
Okay.
What is our water rate history? This is maybe a question for Dana, but what have our water rate changes look like over the last 10 years as compared to what these would look like? And other than like the automatic, have we used the automatic
We have
escalator on the water side?
Yes, I believe I want to say the resolution that was passed in 2015 for water rates added the automatic escalator in the absence of some other rate increase. I don't remember the rate increases approved prior, but I know they weren't at this level. I know that.
We haven't had an escalating rate over the last 10 years other than that 3% CPI.
We had 2015, there was a resolution, I believe it was a multi-year rate increase, 3-year plan.
It's a 3-year plan?
And prior to that, it was 2009 with, again, I think it was a multi-year rate increase, and it was twice a year, every January and July.
Okay. Thank you.
To that question on the debt, that was one of the things that Christy worked with myself and Steph, our consultant, and Steph did a great job on modeling it because we had to see how much debt we could issue each year. So we had to look at all three utilities, electric, water, wastewater, and see what would be available. So you could do that each year, but that number is driven by and has a cap. There's the 40% cap and a coverage. So that's how that was part of how the projects were planned. It's like there's only so much you can do because you can't violate your debt covenants. But it still gets you a lot of money to get the stuff done.
Well, I think this is this is a community conversation around what does it cost us to have clean drinking water delivered to our homes. I mean, it's not us trying to make this decision necessarily, or community trying to decide if they should give us money to be able to do these projects. This is a very much we have a community that uses drinking water, and we've got to figure out a way to continue to provide it. These are shockingly high rate increases, to be honest. I mean, for most people looking at this would go, you're talking about quadrupling my water bill over the next 4 years or 10 years.
10 years.
And I would feel the same way. Like you said, we all pay water bills. We all pay bills, and but I think there's also a ton of information here about why these rates are being discussed at this point, and that capital improvement plan. We've been talking for a year or more, at least, about the needed upgrades to water. We've been looking at grants. We've been, I've been to visit with our senators, and we've been trying to find money from every source, and we'll continue to do that. But $500 million in infrastructure improvements over 10 years, that money doesn't come from anywhere else other than us collecting revenue or finding a grant or doing those things. So I think you're right that we need to continue to do all that, but it is, again, a community discussion about what's it going to cost for us to continue to have clean water coming out of the faucets in our house.
I think that's a really important point, Mayor, that there's kind of a multifaceted approach, whether it's the rate increases in the debt, incurring debt to get those things done, but also the grants. But I think it's important to realize with those, the number of zeros that we have after the projects that we're looking at, while we've been successful with maybe $20 million with ARPA and the other funds, taking extremely large bites out of that really, really big number is going to be challenging. And as you've kind of shared with us, there's a lot, and actually Senator Langford shared with us, there's communities all over the state that are struggling with water issues. We'll be competing against those communities, and some of those communities are struggling not just with the infrastructure, but the actual water supply itself. And so while I'm hopeful and we'll do everything that, I'm sure all of us will do everything we can to bring grant funding to Stillwater to help, I think we don't want to create a false sense of hope that that's going to, take this ginormous bite out of those big dollars.
Councilors, any further questions for Dave specifically about the study itself? Tons of information, tons of work into that, and very much appreciated from our side and you and your team. That's a task in and of itself, just to put all those numbers together and find viable solutions for us. We appreciate the work and the presentation.
Thank you.
I would like to say to the city manager that I would like to understand our contractual obligations. For example, the Rural Water District, what does it say? What are we bound to? And there may be other customers that have contracts with obligations. I'd like to understand all of those, so as before we get to a vote and make sure that we're voting legally. The other thing is that when we get to the point of voting, I would like to understand what the communication plan is, not just within the city and our core water system, but all these other outside the rural District 51 and all those entities, what's our communication plan to them so they don't get blindsided by this if they're not paying attention to the Stillwater News Press or whatever they're watching to keep track of us?
So I would just make a comment to that point, actually to the point of grant funding and going out and trying to find programs for this. Today was actually the first meeting we had with FEMA's Technical Assistance Program, which is a competitive program that we were selected to, one of 20-some, I don't know, not a handful of communities in the country to do that. And actually one of the things we talked about was outreach, talking to our customers, all the folks who share in this water system. So that part of that plan will actually have some outside help to make sure that we're having those conversations. Perfect. Those are actually going to get kicked off here pretty quick. So, we have been able to hopefully find some of that assistance to kind of get us to, because you're right. I mean, I think we have a lot of partners. We talk about this being a regional water system, and it is. 50,000 residents in Stillwater, but 80,000 or so people that actually depend on our water supply, and more that would like to. The cities in Cushing and Perkins would actually love to be on our water systems because they don't have anything near as reliable as ours is. We do need to have those conversations. We are working out and figuring out to make sure that those folks understand, hey, it's great. We love having you as a customer and as a partner, but we're all going to have to share in how this gets funded. So.
And the more customers we have, the more customers we have to spread this capital cost to.
And I appreciate you bringing that up too, because Dave mentioned, so to Mr. Sitton's point in public comment, we do have, the way these numbers are in this report, it is on the assumption that rural water customers that we own are paying the same rates as city customers. You made a recommendation that perhaps those rates need to be higher, but that's a whole nother discussion for another day. I appreciate you making that point. So even though the language is not in here, this study is based on the fact that contract, is in place. Yeah. So,
and on that note too, Bill's prepared. He brought a bunch of information tonight to share, but because of the length of the meeting, I'll take all those recommendations you have for us and bring that back and be part of our communication piece as we discuss rates moving forward. Are you good with that, Bill? Yeah. So he did have all those contracts and all those documents compiled for us for tonight in case it came up.
So just as a reminder, we're going to have town halls on this, the 10th and the 12th, for people to give comment. And then what's the schedule for actually considering resolutions? I think we're talking early November is when we'll be looking at the...
Correct. We had bookmarked the first meeting in November to bring back the rate resolutions after we've had the town hall meetings, and on the October 16th meeting, we were bringing to you publicly at a council meeting examples of bills with all the rates combined.
Can you share a little bit more about what the town hall format will be? So should people expect that they're receiving information from us and getting an opportunity to provide feedback, or is it just us providing information, or what?
Yep.
What should people come expecting?
So what we've asked the consultants for both of those evenings to have a more simplified presentation that's shorter and more easily consumed, and then we will allow time, the second half of the time, to answer any questions, to hear feedback. So it'll be a presentation from the consultants, and then questions and answers with staff and counselors that are present.
And I'm assuming we'll have a chance to sign up and say we'd like to go to one of those, because we can't have a quorum there, obviously, right? Yep. So, okay.
Okay, counselors, further questions about that item? At this point, at least. Again, thanks to staff, certainly working with the consulting teams on both of these studies. This is a lot of work and a lot of difficult decisions and complex factors to take into consideration, and we appreciate the fact that you're bringing back information for us that takes into account what we need to do for the long-term health of our community, and it is going to be a discussion here for the next several weeks for sure. So we appreciate that work. Item 5B on the agenda is consider awarding a bid for the LED light fixtures to Stuart C. Irby Company, authorizing a budget amendment and authorizing the general manager to execute the documents. Mr. Smith, tell us more about this item.
Good evening, trustees. Excited to be here to elaborate a little more on Mr. Moore's comments in the previous meeting. The city of Stillwater has an outdated fleet of non-energy efficient streetlights that are in need of replacement to achieve energy conservation goals. There are approximately 4,400 streetlights throughout the city. On August 21st, the council requested that staff return with an implementation plan to replace existing streetlight fleet with energy-efficient LED streetlights. Since then, staff has worked to create a plan and has taken steps to move forward. The plan includes releasing a bid to procure approximately half of the streetlights in FY24 and release another bid in FY25 to procure the other half in preparation for installation using distribution staff or in-house staff. Staff estimates 2 years to full rollout once they receive the light fixtures. Specifications and bid documents were prepared by staff and released on September 2nd. On September 20th, 2 bids were received and opened. The bids were evaluated and are tabulated in the attached bid tabulation. Stewart C. Irby Company met all the bid specifications, making them the lowest responsibility. And the shocking part is that the estimated delivery is 28 to 56 days. Wow. So when I read that, I thought weeks. Well, that sounds about right. And I went back, that says days. So literally in about 40 or 50 days, we could have 120 pallets of lights show up, and our crews will immediately start deploying those.
Did you tell them this is a government job?
I have a motion here, but I will pause to answer any questions. I know you had Mr. Trustee Harden, you had a question about labor. Again, this is going to be done by our own in-house experts. We estimate that cost to be about $1.3 million, which is something that we would have to pay a contractor, quite frankly, that we're not going to have to because of our ability to do that in-house.
But it is an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Lauren, in the report it says costs are approximately $1.6 million. Is that for all of
the fixtures?
For both years?
Yes, sir.
And then this year is the $800,000.
Yeah.
Just the first part of it. Okay.
And we anticipate next, it's a couple of things. It softens the impact on our capital budget, and we don't have a place to store 120 pallets of lights, so it's going to burden that, take that burden off of us as well, so we can start deploying them and then bring them on. So.
Councilors, questions? Sorry, trustee.
This will be all the streetlights. So if it's tucked back in a neighborhood, we're going to
yes, sir.
Change it out.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's a good question.
So, sorry,
Go ahead.
Maybe I was remembering wrong. There's been a lot of numbers tonight. I was just remembering from the city council meeting tonight that I thought the number allocated for the lights was 500,000.
That's for municipal buildings. It did not include streetlights. That was just for our municipal buildings.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Certainly a difference there. Yeah, these are all the roadway streetlights.
Gotcha.
So in addition to the chiller and the municipal building, this is another piece of the energy savings program that we're working on.
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect.
So about $2 million altogether between the 3 projects.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just curiously, what color are these lights going to be? I mean, are they going to be the orange lights, or?
They're about 300. They're about 3,000 K, and that doesn't mean a lot. And I didn't know a whole lot about it until we did our study, but. We considered several options, and that one was thought to be, it's not too bright, it's not too soft. We're confident that we're going to have complaints. They're going to be they're probably going to be a lot different. But that's the beauty of us doing it in-house, because we can go back and take time without a change order or something and really work with the customer and shield and do things to help. So.
But this will be a whiter light than some of the amber orange ones we see around town.
Yeah, those high pressure sodium, the orange kind of glowing, that will go away. So it'll certainly, and the nice thing, it'll be consistent across the city, right? Because you don't look through the city and see all the different colored lights. So we're excited. We've been wanting to do this for about 3 years. So you ask, we deliver. We're going to pull the trigger on this thing, go with us.
Love to see it. What is your recommendation for us, Lauren?
I have a motion to award the bid for the LED light fixtures to Stewart C. Irby Company. Approve budget amendment appropriating expenditures up to $894,242. That includes the contingency from the Rate Stabilization Fund, and authorize the interim general manager to execute contract documents in the amount of $812,948.
Trustees,
I move to approve the staff recommendation.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Please vote. That item's
you.
approved with a vote of 5-0. Thank you, Lauren. Any reports from the officers of the board? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn SUA. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the Stillwater Utilities Authority is now adjourned, and that concludes our meetings for the evening.